Hello students, welcome to COM 403. We are in week 4 and this week we are looking at influence and how it relates to communication theory. As you look at the week 4 agenda, it is important to take a look and understand that we are reading 3 chapters, chapters 14, 15, and 16. Each of these chapters covers a specific theory that we will be going through this week. We're watching a couple videos on the theories, as well as completing discussion board number 4 no later than Friday, and discussion board number 4 replies no later than Sunday. In addition, this week you have your midterm presentation and project due. Your presentation is due on Friday with reply post due on Sunday, and the actual project is due Sunday. We'll get into that in a second, as well as your communication journal number 2, which is due on Sunday. So we have a lot of things going on this week. We're at the halfway point, and it's very important that we work diligently to get our assignments in on time. Discussion board number 4 asks you to look at elaboration likelihood model as well as cognitive dissonance, and compare those and analyze them to fully reflect on them and construct some thoughtful answers. The questions are directly pertaining to information within the Griffin text, so it's very important that you go through that, listen to this lecture, as well as the videos that are related to these 2 theories. Remember, your original post is due on Friday. You need to include at least one outside text to support your ideas and reply no later than Sunday. So remember, our midterm project is due this week. There's 2 elements to the project, and specifically you're creating a presentation and a paper. Now sometimes students do not understand why the presentation is due before the paper, so I want to spend some time explaining this to you. The presentation aspect of this assignment is not a cumulative thing that is created at the end once you've finished something. We're actually using the presentation aspect as a way for you to start to present and gather your own ideas about the information in your theory that you've selected for this project, and to use it as in the front end as a brainstorming tool to help you start to gather and formalize your thoughts on the theory before you write the paper. So for some, you work backwards. You do the paper first and then the presentation, but we have purposely designed this to be due on Friday, so that way you have spent a significant amount of time determining how you will talk about it and present it, so then you can write a well-defined and thorough paper for that. So in your presentation, you need to know that it has to be a YouTube or VoiceThread presentation. If you do not want to do YouTube, you can do Vimeo, but we don't accept any other formats of that. The presentation must be submitted via YouTube link or a VoiceThread link. Make sure your presentation teaches the viewer the theory, and at your end of your presentation, the viewer should have a full understanding of the theory. It's really designed to help you get started in writing your paper. So in the presentation, I'm looking for you to I'm combining words today. I'm looking for you to define and describe the theory you selected in week 2 by providing a complete overview of the theory, including the definition of the theory, relevant key scholars associated with the theory, a historical perspective on the theory's development, as well as what tradition is housed in and why. In addition, you will be providing a critical reflection on the theory. So this means you'll spend some time evaluating it critically to determine its effectiveness in providing theoretical contributions to the field of communication, as well as sharing your thoughts on its use in human communication when you see it used. And then providing potential extensions of the theory to various types of communication interactions and such. So this video itself is usually going to be probably closer to 5 minutes, but the requirement is 3 to 5 minutes. It's okay if you go over that a little bit, but if you're hovering in the 10 to 15 minute mark, you've probably chatted a little too long. You won't be marked down for time unless it is less than 3 minutes. So please keep that in mind. Again, you will be creating a YouTube or VoiceThread presentation. You are submitting the link to that. I do not, and I will repeat, do not accept Prezis, PowerPoints with audios. Those are automatic zeros. PowerPoints in general, movie files or anything like that. Blackboard cannot support those things for grading, so I can't accept them. It does need to be submitted as a YouTube link, a hyperlink, or a VoiceThread hyperlink. VoiceThread is automatically more private. If you're worried about your privacy, then just create your YouTube video to be unlisted. That means it will not be listed in YouTube search engines and nobody will see it unless you give them the URL. You are able to take down the video once the grades have been submitted if you'd like. So keep that in mind. That's what we're doing this week first. The second thing you'll do after you've completed your video is write your 3 to 5 page APA paper that provides an in-depth analysis and synthesis of the theory. You will include outside sources for this, and essentially what you're doing is taking the oral form of what you presented in your video and putting it on paper in an academic paper. So you're defining and describing the theory. You're providing a comparison of the theory used in at least 2 scholarly journals. That's where it's a little different. That's not in your presentation. And then you're providing a critical reaction. So I need to see evidence of where this is used in academic journals. I need to see your critical reaction to the theory, as well as you defining and describing it. And so that is due on Sunday after you've submitted your presentation. Do not forget to reply to students when you do your presentation, and contact me early in the week with any questions. Your communication journal number 2. Remember I mentioned in the beginning of the term you'll be completing 3 journals that are designed to get you to start thinking about communication and how it relates to that. You were either in the planning, monitoring, reflect, or evaluate stage in your progress of thinking about what you're learning in this course. So this time we're spending some time monitoring and reflecting. We're not yet evaluating. But you're going to write for journal prompt number 2 a 2-page essay in APA format that provides a reflection about what insights you've gained in the course so far, what strategies are you using that are working or not working well to help you learn, what other resources could you be using to help you better complete the course in the last half, in what ways is the teaching in this course supportive to your learning, how can you maximize the instruction and interaction from the professor. If you feel like you're not getting enough information from me, that would be a good point to put that down in that question. Are you struggling for motivation? How much of the coursework interests you? How am I interested in this course? How am I confident in my learning? What could I do to increase my confidence? This is going to help me see where we're at as a class and will help me shape future lectures and supplemental materials to help you determine how you can more adequately engage in the course to help you improve your learning if you want to improve your learning or to successfully complete the course. So that's due on Sunday as well. It's a 2-page essay. The next thing we're going to look at is cognitive dissonance. Before I get into that, I want to point out that we are in the influence section of the course text. And so what influence deals with really is looking at attitudes and behaviors towards different topics in communication and looking at and seeing how communication be influential and persuasive when we consider communication and the use of it. So we look a lot at nonverbal messages. We look at the impact of simple behavioral sequences that could transcend effects of communication. We look at a lot of different things. We believe that persuasive approaches can change people's inner attitudes, but to do that, as researchers, we look at, and theorists, the beliefs, emotional responses, and what they tend to do to how people shift their attitudes being matched by change in actual behavior via communication. So keep that in mind as we're moving through some of these theories this week. The first one we're going to look at is cognitive dissonance, and this is noted as a particularly objective theory, if we think back to objective and interpretive theories, and it is socio-psychological. That's the tradition it's in. It was developed in the 1950s by Leon Festinger, and really what Leon found was that there is a distressing mental state caused by inconsistencies between a person's 2 beliefs or a belief and an action. So what happens is there is dissonance experience. There is a physical discomfort when 2 conflicting ideas emerge. And this idea can be a behavior or a belief. So you can see in the image here that it presents what we do to reduce dissonance. And so cognitive dissonance is all about removing that uncomfortable feeling when we're put in awkward situations or we have an awkward thing happen. So we hold a certain belief. This was first used in the idea, and he found this in his research related to buyer's remorse, how shoppers and buyers experience remorse when they overspend or they fall into the trap of buying too much during a sale, and what they do to reduce that uncomfortable or sickening feeling and the remorse that they feel for that. So consonance in this sense is an internal state of peace. It's what we rest at when we feel comfortable with everything in our life and communication received towards us. Dissonance is an internal state of unrest. So cognitive dissonance is the distressing mental state caused by inconsistencies between beliefs and actions. So if I believe a certain thing, or I have this feeling towards a certain thing, and the behavior does not align with that, or there's a conflicting belief about that, we're going to experience dissonance. We're going to feel discomfort. So we're going to do, Festinger says, usually one of four things: change our behavior, change our belief, add a belief, or ignore the conflict, and we reduce the discomfort. We restore a state of consonance. So it's really important to see how that is. Now, oftentimes Festinger says, okay, this is great, but when does this occur and how do we avoid this? Because some people in his research said, I don't experience dissonance. Well, that's where he came up with selective exposure. That's the tendency that people have to avoid information that could create cognitive dissonance because it's incompatible with their current beliefs. So if you believe Diet Coke is the best thing for you to drink and that's what you love and you're always going to stand by it because it's 0 calories and it's okay, if you all of a sudden hear something that's contrary to that belief, you're going to experience dissonance, and you're going to work towards changing your behavior towards Diet Coke, not drinking it anymore, changing your belief towards it, adding a belief, accepting that that's the case but maybe not following through with your behavior, or ignoring it altogether. Well, Festinger takes it a step further and says that people even go before that, they go beyond that. What they begin to do and they begin to think is they say, I'm only going to expose myself to the things that are relative to what I believe, so I don't have to hear any of the naysayers or anything that's contrary to what I believe in that area. This happens a lot in media. We typically associate and consume news media outlets according to how they present the news, in line with what our beliefs are about that. And so with that, there's a lot of different news networks that present the news in many different ways to hopefully attract viewers, like-minded viewers, to reduce dissonance and agree with what's being presented to them. And so that's cognitive dissonance theory. The next thing I want to look at is social judgment theory. And what social judgment theory tells us is social judgment theory helps us understand that all communication is designed and believed on a line and a latitude of acceptance and rejection. And so really what it comes from is it tells us, and this theory is related in socio-psychological, and it is purely an objective theory, so it's easiest for us to mark, and it tells us anytime we have information, we look at the greater discrepancy, the more hearers will adjust their attitudes. So what we do is we constantly have an attitude of acceptance or rejection. And what happens along this line is that we have middle ground. That's where we're non-committed. And one end of the spectrum is where we accept information. The other end is where we reject information. All communication is naturally judged according to this line, and we naturally sort it out based off of acceptance and rejection on how persuaded we are to do this. Attitude change in one direction or another from a message is based on how the message is advocated to them. Listeners are driven away rather than drawn to an idea. And so there's a lot of things that happen when you're doing persuasive communication that can lead people to reject or believe you. So what happens is there's a lot of talk about credibility and what that means and how that works out. But social judgment theory really offers specific predictions about what happens in the mind of someone who hears or reads a message that falls in line with their latitude of acceptance or rejection. Sheriff, one of the theorists behind this, says the appeal to perceptual distortions of assimilation and contrast are as well as crucial for role and ego involvement, offering compelling explanations of what goes beyond the eyes, yet, like all cognitive explanations, put forth the mental structures and processes that can't be seen. We can only infer what's going on in the heads of those observing us, and the input and the output of messages in by a person's response. Social judgment theory provides an explanation of persuasion being complex, but also that attitude cannot be identified on a single point of continuum. It's hard to imagine the account of what's happening in the minds of those that are listening to us. So we have to know that they're constantly sliding their belief back and forth all across this line. We have an anchor that helps guide us. This is filled with pre-existing knowledge about a particular piece of communication. So like we go back to Diet Coke and we heard it's the greatest thing for us, we may be more along the lines of rejecting that because we have pre-existing knowledge on how harmful diet soda can be, or soda is not healthy, or whatever it may be, and that will help move us towards rejection or towards acceptance of the communication. It just depends. As we move through this week, you'll see that there's a lot of good information about this in our text and in the videos. The last one we're going to look at is elaboration likelihood model. So ELT contends that the major contention in this idea is that we are looking at the probability of how somebody will evaluate communication and accept it, or how they critically evaluate information received. It really is an evaluative theory. It looks specifically at it from an objective standpoint, and it's rooted in the socio-psychological tradition. The central route, we go through a number of different routes to look at how people look at message elaboration and accepting messages or not. And to do that, it's important to see that we have this graphic here to help us. So communication is received, attention and comprehension is given towards it, and then at that point we decide if there is high involvement processing needed or low involvement processing needed. And what ends up happening is we decide how much mental effort we have to put towards processing and understanding the information besides basic comprehension of it. If I know, you know what, this is going to take some of my time, I'm going through, my daughter has special needs, I'm going through the information for her IEP right now, this is high involvement processing, it's not something I'm going to just look at real fast. I'm going to wait and look at it 2 hours from now when I have time to sit down and pay attention to it. It's going to take a lot of mental effort for me to understand what's going on it. So what ends up happening here, we look at people's motivation. The motivation for elaboration. Is it worth moving something through the high involvement processing route, the central route? Or do we just push it to the peripheral route and just blindly approve it or not approve it? What typically happens with this here is that when we look at the peripheral route, we don't critically evaluate information, and either a belief change is just accepted based off the information given, and that behavior change is enacted, and then an attitude happens. What happens in the central route is we give more mental effort towards evaluating the information, the communication given to us. We apply cognitive responses, our personal critical opinion about it, then a belief and attitude changes occurs, and then we have a behavior change, which is really phenomenal. So what people do in terms of persuasion is they look and they see how relative this is to the information they're giving out to who they're trying to communicate with. In the last 20 years, ELM has been a leading, if not the leading, theory of persuasion and attitude change in communication, as well as psychology. Petty and Capaccio and their students have published more than 100 articles on this model, and the dual process conception has stimulated additional research and application that goes beyond what any of them could have thought. So what happens is that the descriptions of ELM are sufficiently impressive and utilized to allow the model to be adapted. There is some ambiguity in how this happens, but ELL is impressive because it pulls together and makes sense out of diverse research results and that have puzzled communication theorists for years. So for example, we're able to answer questions like, why do most people pay less attention to their communication than they do their communicator? So they care more about who's telling them what than what they're really saying. And if speaker credibility is so important, then why does its effect dissipate so quickly? ELM's explanation is that a few listeners are more motivated and able to do the mental work required for a major shift in attitude. So attitude change often yields results that may seem confusing or contradictory, but ELM takes this mainly disjointed findings and pulls them together in a unified whole. It's an integrated function to value a theory of influence within communication. So it's really important to look at it and see how that happens. So to recap, we are reading chapters 14, 15, and 16. We're watching two theories, videos related to theories that we are focusing on. We are working on our midterm project, which has multiple deadlines. Your presentation is due on Friday with replies on Sunday, and the paper's due on Sunday. The communication journal due this Sunday, as well as your discussion board, which has a split deadline of Friday and Sunday as well. Please reach out if you have any questions. I'd love to conference with any of you if you have any questions regarding the theories this week or even the assignments. I pray you all have a blessed week and hang in there. You're all doing a great job. God bless.